January 18, 1998, interview with Mr. William Bodinus, B-O-D-I-N-U-S.
Things that I have, I'm an old man, you know. I'll be 89 in February, so I've had a lot of, my entire career has been in the refrigeration and air conditioning since 1929, so.
Well, why don't you tell me, about how you started in the business and what you first were doing?
Well, okay, I graduated from a technical high school in Chicago in 1926, and the state of Illinois had at that time what they called Smith-Hughes courses. They were trade school courses. Then you could take up the printing industry, or you could take the steel industry, or baking industry. We had a bakery there and so forth, carpentry. You also could take architecture. So I took 4 years of architecture. A little of it was in the mechanical end, but not much. Our text was Walker, and ventilation and little duct sizing and things like that. And then I took a job with a firm of architects when I graduated, and as a draftsman. I was put into the mechanical department. The mechanical department consisted of the chief engineer and me. Just two. Field Bar and Fugard. They were well-known architects. Fugard graduated from, and so did Field Bar, University of Illinois in architecture. So they were quite a firm in Chicago at that time. So, then I was in the mechanical department for 3 years, from 1926 to November 1929, during which period I tried to take the examination to get an architect's license, but I didn't pass. And then I was working on a job, First National Bank building in Houston, as a mechanical draftsman, and I met with the Carrier people and as well as the Brunswick-Rochelle people. And my boss did the engineering, I did the drafting. And so the man from Brunswick-Rochelle Company offered me a job, and things were getting pretty bad in 1929. So I took a job with Brunswick-Rochelle. They were manufacturers of ammonia machines and carbon dioxide machines. And my assignment was sales engineer, CO2 sales engineer, carbon dioxide sales. And we manufactured in the Rochelle plant in Chicago carbon dioxide machines. So I was right up to my ears in CO2 equipment. And in the fall of 1930, we merged with Carrier. So then I was transferred over into the Carrier engineering department. And most of the Carrier men were airside people. Carrier was at that time basically a first-class sheet metal contractor. And they manufactured air washers and centrifugal machines, so forth, down in Newark, New Jersey. But they didn't have much. None of the men had much. They were all college graduates, but none of them had much experience in small refrigeration ammonia machines or carbon dioxide machines. So I was the one that laid out there in Chicago there. CO2 systems and so forth. And then Freon came into the picture in 1931, and CO2 started downhill. All during the 30s, up to about 1935. CO2 met its demise completely. Done. But all during the 20s and before that, slightly before that, CO2 was the #1 refrigeration cycle in the air conditioning industry. And Groeschel was the #1 company in the United States that made most of the CO2 machines. This part of this is in the historical article, of course, I'm putting together. In the meantime, I'd been going to night school, and in 1935 I got my BS degree from what is now Illinois Institute of Technology. It was Lewis Branch at that time. And I was a pretty good refrigeration engineer by that time. But having gone to school at night, working in the day, it's a pretty damn good system. So that's how it happened to be. And then I progressed at Carrier, from the engineering department into the sales department, into the management department, right up the line until I finally I retired in 1974, Carrier, which was 45 years after I started. I was the top man in the Western Zone. My territory was from Pittsburgh to Hawaii, from Canada to the Gulf. In the meantime, I'd obtained my professional engineering degree, license, and I continued my night school activity by teaching at the school I graduated from, Lewis Institute and the Armor Institute, which formed Illinois Tech, as well as Northwestern University. I started, I developed 2 courses for the graduate school at Armor Institute, and taught that before the war from 1938 to about 1941. And then after the war, I taught 2 graduate courses at Northwestern University. Under Burgess Jennings. Do you remember Burgess Jennings?
I didn't know him, but I certainly have heard of him.
Well, he was head of the mechanical department, and he was my predecessor when I became chairman of the Chicago section of ASHRAE in 1945. So we were very close. And that was an interesting experience. So that's the 9 men pulled out of Carrier, 9 Groeschel employees pulled out of Carrier and went in business for themselves. They called themselves Groeschel Engineering Company, which company exists today. All of the principals that I work with are dead now, except me. And of course I stayed with Carrier. And at that time, in 1932, I wasn't very far along at Carrier either. So then I became the only source of information at Carrier in the Chicago office anyway, to do anything about CO2. The last job that I engineered was for the Commonwealth Edison Company. That's the power company, Northern Illinois. And that was 2 horizontal double-acting duplex CO2 machines, which was put in 1935, lasted about 15 years before it was replaced. Now you know the history of it.
And so what did you do then after the 1940s?
Well, in 1940, of course, I was its carrier, and of course the war came on then, and most air conditioning systems ceased except those for the government powder drying and so forth. And during the war, I was assigned to the Bureau of Yards and Docks, not in the service. I was never in the service. And I obtained some $15 million worth of orders for carrier on portable refrigeration systems that were installed in the cold storage plants in Quonset huts and so forth. They were 5-ton units packed up into the Quonset huts, grain mills to take care of frozen foods and so on, as well as air conditioning units for drying parachutes and things like that. That went on for about 4 years. Also did some special jobs for industry, frequency meter, freezer installations, and some actual industrial installations for making Bell and Howell company and places like that, making war instruments.
And then after that, what did you do?
Well, in 46, we went right back into the air conditioning business, and that is the era when, that is really the era after the war when office buildings were air conditioned. Before the war, very few office buildings had been air conditioned. And there was a big push on building construction, and of course all buildings then became air conditioned, and especially the lower floors, the first 5 floors, particularly in the Chicago area. Those were the floors that were least attractive from a rental standpoint, so they put in air conditioning so they could rent those floors easy too. And then the department stores took hold. Even the famous department stores like Marshall Field's had only been partially air conditioned, possibly the basement, first floor, again to attract customers. And then the entire buildings started to become air conditioned. Montgomery Ward took hold. Sears Roebuck. So although Sears Roebuck and Montgomery Ward both had started in 1934 or 35 to air condition their retail stores. So that's what happened in my experience.
And then what you ultimately left Carrier and went into business for yourself then?
No, I retired from Carrier in 1974.
Oh, okay, so you stayed at Carrier your entire career.
Yes. And I received a pension from Carrier and so forth. And then Carrier had 6 plants, sheet metal specialty plants. Had one at Dallas, which was under my supervision. We had one in Los Angeles. We had one in Cleveland. And we had one in Chicago, where I was headquartered. And they had one in New York and one in Philadelphia and Atlanta. And then Carrier was starting to fall into disrepute with consulting engineers because they were in competition with consulting engineers. We were in the install complete business. We would sell an air conditioning job complete, ask no questions. And the way we sold it at that time, which I did too, a tremendous amount, we'd go to the head of the department store and say, now, we will air condition your department store, summertime to a temperature of 80 degrees and 50%. We'll heat it in the wintertime to 75 degrees. And the cost is $350,000. That was the contract. No equipment size, no nothing else.
So you just guaranteed the end result.
That's right. And that's the way we sold. I still have copies of the standard contract. And, of course, you as a professional engineer didn't like that for the dam because we were taking business away from you with the layout. So, and then also, the contractors didn't like it because we had a complete cheap little contracting group and a pipe fitting group. And what the hell, we're manufacturing air conditioning equipment and window units and everything else by that time. So the managers decided to get the hell out of the installed complete business in 1960. And we went straight as manufacturers and started the dealer-distributor program. The equipment would be sold through dealers and distributors, small size equipment. The bigger size, the centrifugal machines and the large air conditioning, air handling apparatus was sold direct. And, so we continued to maintain these shops, you call them, until, but we only made parts, dampers and so forth, and enclosures, wall-to-wall enclosures, fan coil units. I guess you know the Weathermaster system that carried the belt, and we made the spiral tubing and so forth and so on. So we closed all those plants in a period of about 5 years before I retired, except the one in Skokie. And they maintained that as long as I was around because I was still watching over it carefully, and it was a profit. And when I retired, they said, Bill, get an appraisal and sell that plant. So I bought it, along with another very close contractor friend of mine, and that's how it became the E.H. Gustafson Company. We named it after our shop superintendent, who was a good Swede, well known in the industry, and with us 20, 30 years, and he was about to retire. He was the same age that time as I was. So we named it after Gus. He died about 10 years ago now. And so I took over the business, and that's where I hit for today.
So you've been doing that ever since.
Yeah. So a couple of my old customers at Carrier, one in particular, the Ferrara Pan Candy Company. They make this little packages of candy, you know, Boston baked beans, lemon heads, and so forth. And I had been very close to Ferrara for many years, so I still do their engineering and make them use Carrier equipment. So, matter of fact, I buy the equipment from Carrier and sell it to them. That is 2% margins. So I still maintain some engineering ability.
Well, I'd like to, now that I've got the overview of what your career was, I'd like to go back into some of those earlier things you talked about and discuss them a little bit more. And one thing that would be interesting to know, if you know this, is why did Carrier decide to buy Brunswick Rochelle?
Because we were too much of a competitor of Carrier. What the hell we did? Well, Carrier did very little theater business, and that was the big business for air conditioning in the 20s. That was the only business for air conditioning in the 20s, you might say. It was 95% of the air conditioning or air cooling in our systems were theaters. And the only reason for that was that during that period of time and before, for centuries before, theaters were closed in the summertime. Movie houses, so they were too hot. You couldn't use them. So from July 1st until September 1st, they were closed, out of business. Did you know that?
Well, I guess I never thought about it, to tell you
Well,
the
it's a
truth.
fact. I know we couldn't go to the show in summertime. There were no shows.
Well, you know, everything that you usually read about air conditioning history says that in the 1920s, of course, you know, it talks about the movie houses that where they began to air condition them. And the thing is that you usually read give Carrier a lot of credit for doing that they had taken over this business pretty much did it all. But what you're saying is that it
Not
isn't
true.
quite that way.
Carrier did a couple of jobs. They did the Riviera, and that's been published 1,000 times in New York City and so forth. Carrier got all the credit for that. But they were in the business, in the theater business. They were in the industrial business. Because really that's what Carrier's business was, industrial air conditioning. And there was damn little proper cooling before 1920 anywhere.
Well, you know, and then, you know, along the same lines, a lot of the credit for Carrier getting so much theater business, supposedly in the 1920s, is because of the centrifugal chiller, you know, that Carrier developed, and that supposedly took a lot of the business away from people like Brunswick Rochelle.
I don't think there was one centrifugal machine installed in a theater by Carrier before 1926 or 27 or 28. Most of the installations before that, carbon dioxide, everywhere. It's the only machine that was safe. You could put it. Any other machine, may have been some ammonia installations that I don't know about that were put in remote powerhouses to a water pipe filler, but I never was involved in anything like that.
But as far as direct expansion systems,
Well,
carbon
even
dioxide-
if it was chilled water in the building, you couldn't put a 200-ton ammonia machine in the basement of a hotel and hope you get by with it. I did that once myself. I put in a fur ball for a furrier in Detroit with a 10-ton ammonia machine. And the engineer tightened up the stuffing box of the gauge glass on the receiver, broke it. The whole damn building got up. So they're all up on the roof and out in the street. Telephone call from Detroit, what the hell was going on here? You couldn't put ammonia in the building unless you put it on the roof.
Well, what kind of competition existed for Brunswick Rochelle and, you know, at the time that you were there, 1929, 1930? Who else was competing against you?
Well, there was one company called Carbondale Refrigeration Company, somewhere in Pennsylvania, that made the horizontal CO2 machines. And there was another company called American Carbonic Company, and I think that was made over in Michigan, and they made the horizontal machines. In the earliest days, early 1900s, a couple of the old line refrigeration companies like Wolf Lindy made machines. I never ran into any installations of Wolf Lindy. And York, Baker, Frick, and Worthington all took a crack at something. You see, you couldn't use CO2 in a closed crankcase machine because the pressure was too great for the crankcase. So you all had to use the stuffing box arrangement of the double-acting piston. So, and then in Fred Whitmire worked in the boiler plant in York Rochelle, And he was there in 1897 when they decided to go into the refrigeration business. I think Fred was more or less an engineer at that time, and he more or less convinced the Crochelle brothers to get into the business, so they formed a separate company. I guess you know this part of it. And they called it the Crochelle Brothers Ice Machine Company. And they made some small vertical piston type machines and got into the business around 1800, 1888, 1899. And then they got into the horizontal machine business and started to install all for refrigeration, making in ice plants. In hotels, they put in an ice plant, maybe a field the size of this room. The ice cans, 300-pound ice cans, put into the brine solution. And they cool the brine solution, circulate the brine and freeze the ice, take it out.
Well, when Crochelle got into the horizontal CO2 machines, the larger machines, do you know who designed that equipment? Or was it Whitmire that designed that?
No. Yes, he may have been involved, because in 1915, Whitmire pulled out of Crochelle. Fred Whitmire, whom I met, and formed his own company in Chicago and duplicated his machines. The size, the bore and stroke speeds were all the same as the Crochelle machine. So obviously, there was no legal, to my knowledge, no legal fight about that. So I guess Whitmire must have been the key man in that Crochelle in designing these compressors, because he took the whole thing with him. So now you have two machine companies in 1915, 16 in Chicago making identical machines. The job had come up, they both compete against each other. And so it was when I'd entered there. And I got to know Fred's son real well. And he was in the contracting business also. They do theaters. I don't know, they may have done as many theaters around Chicago as Crochelle did. Small theaters. So they were a busy company from 1915, 16, right on up to the end.
What happened to Whitmire's company when the CO2 business went out?
Fred Whitmire, his son, by that time they belonged to the Contractors Association and so forth. And I was a member of the Contractors Association representing Carrier. And they meet every month, still do. And call it the Heating Pipe Unit, Mechanical Contractors Association, probably heard. And Fred was a member there. And I'll tell you an interesting experience. They had an annual party there, which my wife and I always went to. And I don't think we ought to repeat this year.
Okay.
But this party was at a club called the ASHRAE in Chicago, downtown Chicago. We were up on the third or fourth floor of this club, and the entertainment that evening was a dancing group of about 40 black girls. And they got up there, they danced various dances together. They get into these dances where you're going like this, and all of a sudden you're going like this here. This went on for an hour or so. By that time I was going like this. Well, that ended the dinner party. About 2 of the men died that night of heart attacks. Fred Whitmire was one of them.
Really?
Yep. So, that put a hell of a dent in his company. And then his successors were employees and good men and so forth, but then even the contracting company disappeared a few years after that.
Now, the Fred Whitmire that died of a heart attack at the gathering, that was the senior, or?
No,
That was the son.
That's
Okay.
son.
Now, had the senior already passed away by then?
Yes. The senior was, this must have been in the 50s. So he would have been 100 years old.
So it just kind of fell apart then after that.
Yep, that sucker. Both Crochelle, when COT, although Carrier had all of the residual equipment from manufacturing CO2 machines, and then sent it east to our plant, to our New Jersey Carrier plant, and the superintendent and the chief engineer, Rochelle Bardenhauer, who made all the calculations and so forth for capacities, and had retired, and then Whitmire and the Crochelle group that pulled out did all the service work on the CO2 machines during that period after 1930. Carrier got the hell out of it right away and moved into Freon, Freon 12. And they did the service work, and so did Whitmire. They did a lot of service work. Whitmire worked on the Crochelle compressors, and Crochelle worked on the Whitmire compressors.
I guess it was fortunate that they were both the same, was it?
Right.
Made it easy to do it.
Yeah.
So Carrier, after they took over Brunswick Crochelle, pretty much wanted to get out of the CO2 business anyway.
Yeah, well, of course, on any big machine, centrifugal was number one with Carrier, and it was, should be, was.
How did the centrifugal machines and the carbon dioxide machines compare on efficiency and so on?
Well, see, the critical temperature of CO2 is 86 degrees. From then on, it has no more heated liquid. It's gas, and you can compress it and expand it, and you get some refrigeration out of it. You don't get very many BTUs. So, CO2 is good with 70-degree condensing water. Its horsepower per ton is probably 9/10 or 9.5 or something like that. So in the beginning, talk about 1930, CO2 brake horsepower under those conditions was just as good as centrifugal, maybe a little bit better. All of this information on this data and this tables and so forth, I have already sent to Will. I told him
In fact, he has since sent that to me, so I know
Good.
what you're talking about.
so all those tables that I had in my files are there, and you find it was good. But hell, they were sending it out to California, they were sending it to New Orleans, and so, but you could never get shit. You're lucky if you got 85-degree water. Look at this. And then the horsepower went right on up to 1.7 or 1.8. But under those circumstances, no good.
What about the installed cost of the equipment? How did that compare? You know,
Well-
if you did a job with a centrifugal system versus a CO2 system.
Well, the centrifugal had to be a chilled water system. So you were stuck with a chilled water piping installation and so forth. So the centrifugal installations were more costly than the carbon dioxide installations. I don't know how much more, but maybe 10% more. Carrier's centrifugal price wasn't, they weren't giving it away either. As a matter of factory still has some manufacturing costs. I ended up completely in charge of everything in Chicago, so I had all those files.
You had, I think in some of the material that I had read, it was mentioned that some of the CO2 systems, apparently the later ones, the earlier ones used pipe coils, and then
Yep.
the later ones used, it's a thin copper.
Thin, you know what Aerofin is?
Yes, yes.
That's a Carrier invention.
Yeah.
Carrier had the patents on that in 1924.
Now, were the tubes for the CO2 systems, were they copper tubes or were they steel
Yes,
tubes?
the Aerofin tin coils, they were 1-inch copper, extra heavy copper pipes.
Okay, 'cause I was gonna say, how do they contain the pressure? But that's
Oh,
what
yeah.
they did, they used extra heavy.
Extra heavy copper pipe, and the fins were about 2.5 inches. Oh, 3/16.
Wound around.
The engineering is, in this material you sent me, some of which I put in my paper, by Whitmire, was very amusing to me because prior to that, in the material you got, that's before I had this Whitmire. You will note the figures that I have in that are the same that Whitmire had in this article.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Well, you probably would, but I immediately caught that because I read the article from Whitmire. For example, we used 13 to 15 lineal feet of Aerofin per ton of refrigeration. That's how it was engineered. And it was about 10 rows deep. That was it. If you wanted a cheap job, you'd get down to maybe 12 lineal feet per ton and maybe 8 rows deep, you know. It's some engineering in it.
Yeah.
But I think that was more or less national. They never made any tests on the thin coils or anything like that. So it was really trial and error, but it worked. It worked through the place.
Well, we were, talking about how a lot of the big business for the CO2 machines in the 20s and into the early 30s were the movie theaters, and then you also mentioned, to a small extent, I guess, I think you mentioned hotels and things. Was there very much hotel business at that time?
No, there wasn't. There were 1 or 2 rooms. Like there was a cocktail lounge in the Morrison Hotel in Chicago. And I was sent over there in 1936 or thereabouts. Because that cocktail lounge on the first floor, and this is during was installed during Prohibition, was cooled from air from the tunnel at the bottom of Chicago. Chicago has a industrial tunnel all over the streets. I don't know if you know that or not.
Yeah, I didn't know it until recently when I read it in the paper about how part of it got flooded. There was some people.
Well, I wrote an article on it for ASHRAE on that a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. They would take the air from that tunnel, which was around 58 degrees, and ventilate the cocktail lounge with it. And I was sent over there to see, it started to get smelly, so musky and stuff. So we replaced that with the regular air conditioning system and Carrier. But, so the cocktail lounge would be, and there might be another space. That's all that was in the hotel. In 1937, the Palmer House contracted with a engineer, Charlie Leopold. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
Yes,
Out of Philadelphia.
I've heard of them.
And he laid out complete air conditioning system using Carrier equipment, specified Carrier machine, and that's was installed in 37 or 38 in the Palmer House. Now, that was the first hotel in Chicago that was air conditioned, where the rooms were air conditioned and so on. I don't think it was completely air conditioned at the time, but the first 400-ton carrier centrifugal was installed in the Palmer House. That was the largest centrifugal made up to that time. And it was 1937, 38. Then the other hotels started to follow afterwards.
Well, apparently there were isolated examples earlier than that time where they would put in systems just for, like you had said, part of the hotel, where they would do like a banquet room or things like that.
Public spaces.
Because we had, talked over the telephone about the Congress Hotel, which was apparently one of Whitmire's earliest jobs. And then I think, as I remember, I think the Blackstone Hotel in Chicago had a system, and I think that was a Brunswick Crochelle system, or a Crochelle system.
It was, yeah. As a matter of fact, I presented the manager with a 50-year certificate when I was a carrier. And that's in the material that we got from the will. There's a picture of that when I presented I don't remember offhand what the dates were when that was put in, but it was about 1905 or 1906.
The Blackstone?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit. I think it was around 1911, 1910, 1911. Yeah, the Congress Hotel system was around 1905 or something.
Maybe it was the Congress one.
And, we were talking about people involved in CO2 work, and, you talked about Whitmire and some of the other companies. Did you ever read or hear of any of the material that had been done by a guy named Justice Gooseman or Gardner Voorhees?
Voorhees I did.
Okay.
Not Gooseman.
Yeah. Gooseman had written a series of articles for Ice and Refrigeration, the trade magazine,
yes,
on carbon dioxide systems. And then, of course, Voorhees was involved. I guess he first was involved with ammonia, and then later got real heavy into CO2 work, and had designed that multiple effect compressor where he brought in the suction gas into the side of the compressor.
Side of the cylinder.
Or side of the cylinder, yeah, side of the cylinder. But he didn't, as far as I know, he wasn't involved in manufacturing anything. I think I don't know whose equipment he used, but maybe anybody he could get.
Yeah. Well, most of it is tailor-made at that time anyways. If you wanted to get a Frick machine, you'd probably talk to Frick who would make a machine, or Worthington. Specialized.
Well, when you got up into the into the 30s, later 30s, then I guess the theater business by that time was switching over to centrifugal stuff, or other people's systems, or what did they?
Mostly all Freon.
Okay.
First Freon cloud machine I put in a theater carrier. It was in 1935, 36. In Bloomington, Illinois. Put in two vertical two-cylinder ammonia machines using Freon 12. And it was all right, except the damn stuffing box. The ammonia machine all had stuffing pouches. They didn't have mechanical seals or anything like that. And it worked. They lost a little Freon and so forth.
Now, who made those compressors that you
Worthington made those. Worthington made compressors with the carrier name on it for some time. A couple of years, some years.
Now, at that time, why was it that, I think by that time, hadn't Carrier begun using refrigerant 11 in their centrifugals?
Yeah, the first refrigerant 11 machine was installed in Chicago at the Mandel Brothers department store in 1934. I was involved in that. And again, it was for the basement, first floor, second floor, I think. And I think it was around a 300-ton machine. And it was turbine driven.
Now, since Carrier had been so kept up on the centrifugal work and so on, and then you're talking about theaters later on being air conditioned using R12 systems with reciprocating compressors. Why didn't they use the R11 centrifugals in those theater jobs?
Come in. Well, in the first place, the small centrifugal machine. You see, Carrier had made centrifugal machines using the General Electric gas compressor from 35 to about 50 tons back in 1929 and 30. Hermetic machine. They used a 17,000 RPM gas compressor in Chicago. Several of them were installed and they ran for many years, but they were very costly, quite costly. I don't know how much more they cost over the reciprocating cycle, but they were more costly, but it was supposedly a much better installation. So forth. And then when the Depression came on, they quit making those. And so there was no centrifugal, no small centrifugal like a very matter of fact, you asked me about the conduit quartermaster system. And as I told you, I met with the luncheon meeting with Carrier and the other principals in the Chicago office, and he had explained, this is in 1938, he explained the principle of the weathermaster system, which was to supply a limited amount of outside air as required for ventilation in each space, and delivered through nozzles in the unit at a high velocity, causing a secondary induction of about 3 times the primary air, which secondary air passed over a cooling coil, which is a combination heating and cooling coil. And that was the principle of it still is, of the induction weathermaster system. Let's see, what are we talking about now?
So what kind of a person was Willis Carrier when you had met with him on that occasion and other occasions?
Well, my first contacts with Willis Carrier were as an employee in the engineering department when he would present certain engineering principles to a group, and is a very congenial person. Then in the 30s, later 30s, about 36 or 37, a man by the name of Max McGraw of the McGraw Electric Company was on our board of directors, and he owned a 3,000 acres of property on the Fox River just west of Chicago, which he converted into a game club called the Fin and Feather Club. And Willis Carrier was a member of that. And I then became quite acquainted with Max McGraw and from Carrier from time to time, who would be at the club. Because I was assigned to do all the engineering for air conditioning the restaurant which McGraw built there, and for providing air conditioning systems for the smoking of pheasants and fish and so forth. And I hunted out there with Mr. Carrier several times. Also, when I would go to Syracuse, I stayed at Mr. Carrier's home, and he had a fish pond in the back of his home in Syracuse, and we did a little fishing there, and I thus became quite acquainted with Willis, because he loved to hunt and fish, and so did I. Also, during when Prohibition ceased in 1933, the breweries started to rebuild, and Mr. Carrier applied the centrifugal machine to breweries, first in a brine circulating system, circulating brine to the stock cellars, fermentation cellars, and then later by direct condensation of ammonia vapor in the cooler of the centrifugal machine, called the ammonia condensing system. The so-called ammonia liquid would then be pumped to the cellars using direct expansion coils, and thus became the ideal method of refrigerating the breweries with ammonia. And I was with Willis Carrier about a week before he died, when he wanted me to, he knew he was going to pass on, although I doubted it, and he wanted to give me his Parker shotgun, which I refused to take because I didn't think he was going to die. That's the kind of a guy he was.
So you were pretty close to him, really, then? They say that, you read these stories about him being somewhat absent-minded at times. Did you ever experience that?
Absent-minded is really not the true term, because he had a 2-foot slide rule always in his possession, and he would get involved in calculating certain engineering problems. He was the most capable man of handling calculus that I ever knew, and he would get into these deep problems, and you just wouldn't know you were existing.
So he really just had a tremendous power of concentration.
That's right. That's right. I observed that. I sat opposite him and watched what went on. You and I can use calculus and know about it and so forth. He actually used it like arithmetic.
Well, that's amazing. I guess he really
You want to
would.
know what the temperature, 3 inches in this wall, they tell you it's, well, it's 90 degrees outside, the temperature in there happens to be 84 degrees. Just like that.
So he really was, in many respects, a genius.
Yes, he was.
Well, when you used to get together with him, on hunting and fishing and things, did he mainly talk about business
No.
and things, or?
Not at all. He was just as ordinary as any other person. He smoked his pipe. He loved his pipe, smoked it, and his conversation was far from air conditioning or anything else. And I don't want you to think that I was with him regularly. It was only once in a while, maybe 3 times a year or 4 times a year we got together, and maybe 2 of those times would be on business and not sportsmanship.
Did you get to know any of the other principals at Carrier, any of the other
I knew all of
co-founders?
them.
Did you know all of
To
them?
every one of them. J.I. Lyle was the top man, and he formed the company. And he used Carrier's name because Carrier was already well known at Buffalo Forge as an engineer. And they put him right out in front. But he was a very fine businessman. J.I. Lyle was born and raised in Kentucky, graduated from the University of Kentucky, was a tremendous alumnus, and many, if not most, of the early Carrier engineers came from University of Kentucky, and he was a close acquaintance of Paul Anderson, and that's why Paul Anderson is, it had become, I guess still is, the great professor of air conditioning in the country. And his brother, C.R. Lyle, was with Carrier as a sales manager, I think, of the New York office. And then he left Carrier, and I think he went with the Armstrong Company. But he was still, I think, on the board of directors. And E.T. Murphy was the head of the graduate of Lehigh University in Pennsylvania, and was manager of the Philadelphia office. Ed Heckel was construction manager, and he ended up as manager of the Chicago office. And Ned Stacy was the research engineer, and a man by the name of Smith was the Tobes, T-O-B-E-S, Tobes Smith, was manager of construction. That meant sheet metal fabrication, erection, and all piping systems, installation work. And Logan Lewis, I was an engineer, and I think that constituted the original founders, which I believe were 7 men.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And then when the Crochelle group pulled out of Chicago in 1932, Ned Murphy was transferred to Chicago in the Midwest region as the manager. And Ed Heckel still remained here, but for some reason became disenchanted in 1938. And he retired and became a professional engineer in Chicago for a number of years.
who are some of the other leading people, leading engineering people at Carrier, or who had later left, Carrier, that you had gotten to know?
Well, Bob Waterfield was the right-hand man of Willis Carrier in the centrifugal engineering, and had a lot to do with the design of the centrifugal compressors. Actually, in this month's magazine, did you read that yet? The second page about Carrier and the centrifugal. Well, Carrier used the German compressor and never made a compressor, centrifugal compressor, until about 1930 or 31, or possibly 32. The only reason they made their own compressor at that time, and I was there, so I know this, was because the installation made in, I think, the Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C. had installed a couple of Carrier centrifugal machines. And the government inspector noticed that at the bottom of the casing of the centrifugal machine was a nameplate manufactured by the Jaeger Machine Company in Germany. The federal law at that time stated that you could not use any foreign manufactured equipment in government buildings. This is my personal recollection. So Uncle Sam descended upon Carrier and pointed out that they no longer could or should use foreign compressors. And then Carrier tried to get a company in the United States to build this machine for them, and finally decided they'd build it themselves. And that was the first U.S.-made centrifugal machines in this country. That's what happened.
So Waterfield was the right-hand centrifugal man. Who were some of the other people that...
Well, Waterfield was the right-hand centrifugal man, and he joined up with the Buensot-Stacy group in 1937 to form Buensot-Stacy Air Conditioning Company, along with 7 or 8 other Carrier men, and left Carrier. They, Waterfield then apparently designed the hermetic centrifugal machine and got the patents on it, and then negotiated with Train Company to allow them to build the first hermetic centrifugal machines. This is in 1938.
So the train design was designed by Waterfield.
Yes. I think the patents are probably in his name, but I don't know that. So that was the beginning of Train's business in the centrifugal machines.
But it turns out that Train hadn't developed the first centrifugal hermetic, because the ones that General Electric made for Carrier were the first ones, probably.
So the Carrier made using the General Electric. That's right.
Do you know who designed the General Electric hermetics?
Well, that was a Carrier machine. General Electric never did have a Carrier machine. General Electric never had a centrifugal.
No, but they manufactured one for Carrier, didn't they?
No, Carrier manufactured using the General Electric domestic gas compressor, which they had already developed.
Oh, okay.
They had an electric gas compressor which pumped gas from the various sources, and so Willis Carrier used, probably Waterfield used that compressor and assembled it with a cooler and condenser to make a packaged centrifugal machine.
Okay, but that General Electric compressor, that was made by General Electric?
Yes, made by, that
And
was
Carrier just bought them.
that's right, a high-speed compressor.
And that was introduced when?
About 1928 or 29.
And,
It only lasted about 3 or 4 years. Stopped making it.
and was that because of expense?
Well, Depression. Carrier almost went broke in 1932, and all of us we got 10% cut in salary, and all of us contributed 1 month work without pay, and they were so bad off. And they sold their operation in Britain, I think, for $500,000, which enabled them to keep going in the Depression. I forget the man's name who was in charge of the British company.
Did you know, or get to know any of the other famous air conditioning engineers at the time, like Fleischer or Bramer?
No, I was pretty well bottled up right there in Carrier. And,
Of course, they were all competitors of Carrier. So.
yeah, well, I don't remember at that time. I wasn't old enough to be in the, or advanced enough at Carrier to be in the. Well, I did join the ASHRAE ASRE in 1941, and I had been active a few years before that. I just wasn't far enough along.
Well, is there, any other things that you would like to tell me about? I mean, you probably have lots of things you could say, but has anything come to mind that might be interesting?
Well, from a historical standpoint, one thing I do know is that Carrier spent a lot of money in research. I think more so than anyone else. For most all of these years, they kept on designing items. I believe they were the first ones that designed the evaporative condenser for ammonia systems. And also for a number of years, they developed a cooling tower using an absorption media. I think they were the first ones to do that. And actually in the Carrier Skokie plant, we built several hundred of these cooling towers, and then dropped out of that business, dropped out of the evaporative condenser business. And others picked it up and made a good business of it. But Carrier is responsible for a lot of the basic equipment designs.
Did they continue to place such emphasis on research, or did that kind of decrease as time went on?
No, I don't know how much they're spending right now, but every year they spend thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on straight research. They always had a research department. Even at the time of the merger in 1930, both Carrier and Groeschel, I know Groeschel had a nominal research department. For the most part, it was on a trial and error basis. But, they kept records and so forth of the work that they did. So,
Okay, well, thank you very much for all the information you've given.
well, it's been, as I say, my only career, and you go back to 1926 as a mechanical draftsman. What is it, 70 some odd years?
It's a long career.